When Franklin Mercer stood up at his son's wedding and pulled out a gun, 147 guests thought they were about to witness a toast. Instead, they witnessed a murder. The bride collapsed at the altar in her white lace gown, blood spreading across the floor of St. Maribel's chapel. But here's what makes this case absolutely chilling. Franklin didn't know his daughter-in-law was hiding a secret that destroyed his family, until someone sent him a text message 5 minutes before he pulled the trigger. Someone at that wedding wanted Courtney Reynolds dead, and they made sure Franklin would be the one to do it. This is the story of a wedding day massacre, a hit-and-run cover-up, and a mystery that investigators still haven't solved. If you're into true crime cases that leave you with more questions than answers, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what happened in Clearwater, Florida will shake you to your core. Saturday, June 15th, 2024. Clearwater, Florida, 4:38 p.m. The courtyard of St. Maribel's Chapel was decorated with white drapes flowing in the humid breeze, palm trees swaying gently overhead, and rows of wooden chairs were filled with smiling guests dressed in pastels and summer suits. Children ran between the aisles. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. The air smelled like jasmine and salt water carried in from the Gulf Coast just 2 miles away. Courtney Reynolds stood at the altar in a fitted lace gown, her dark hair pinned up with tiny white flowers woven through the curls. Her hands rested in Daniel Mercer's, her fiancé, now husband, who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. The officiant, Reverend Holland, a kind-faced man in his 60s, had just asked Courtney to repeat her vows. I, Courtney Ann Reynolds, take you, Daniel James Mercer, to be my lawfully wedded husband. Her voice was steady, calm. She smiled softly as she spoke. Daniel squeezed her hands. Tears welled in his eyes. This was the moment they had planned for 8 months, the moment that was supposed to be the beginning of forever. But in the front pew, something shifted. Franklin Mercer, Daniel's father, sat rigidly in a charcoal gray suit, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench. He was 64 years old, a retired contractor with calloused hands and a weathered face that rarely showed emotion. For the entire ceremony, he had stared straight ahead, not at his son, not at the bride, but at some invisible point beyond them. His phone had vibrated in his jacket pocket 2 minutes earlier. He pulled it out slowly, glanced down, read the message. His face went pale. Then, just as Courtney finished her vows and said the words, I do, Franklin Mercer stood up. The movement was sudden, unnatural. Guests near him turned to look, confused. The Reverend paused mid-sentence. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, his brow furrowing. Dad, Daniel said quietly. Franklin didn't respond. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a handgun. Screams erupted before anyone could process what was happening. Guests scrambled backward, chairs toppling over. A woman near the front covered her child's eyes. The string quartet stopped playing. Daniel's eyes went wide. Dad, what are you? The gunshot was deafening, a single crack that echoed off the chapel walls and silenced every voice, every breath, every heartbeat in that courtyard. Courtney's body jerked backward. Her eyes went wide with shock, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. She stumbled, her hands reaching for Daniel, fingers grasping at air. Then she collapsed. Her white gown pooled around her on the stone floor, a deep red stain spreading across the fabric just below her ribcage. Blood seeped through the lace, dark and fast. Daniel dropped to his knees, catching her before her head hit the ground. "Courtney! Courtney!" His voice cracked, raw and desperate. He pressed his hands against the wound, blood spilling between his fingers. "Someone call 911! Help! Please!" Chaos exploded. Guests ran for the exits, shoving past each other in panic. Others stood frozen, hands over their mouths, unable to move. A bridesmaid in a peach dress collapsed to the ground, sobbing. The flower girl, no older than 5, screamed for her mother. And Franklin Mercer. He didn't run. He didn't try to hide. He simply let the gun fall from his hand. It clattered onto the stone floor with a metallic thud. He stood there, staring down at Courtney's body, his face expressionless, his arms hanging limp at his sides. 2 groomsmen tackled him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. "Don't move! Don't you dare move!" Franklin didn't resist. He didn't fight. He just lay there, his cheek pressed against the cold stone, and whispered something barely audible over the chaos. "I just found out. I just found out." 6 minutes later, police cars flooded the chapel parking lot, sirens wailing. Paramedics rushed to Courtney, cutting away her dress, starting compressions, loading her onto a stretcher. Daniel refused to let go of her hand, following the stretcher all the way to the ambulance, his wedding suit soaked in her blood. Franklin was cuffed and placed into the back of a patrol car. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone, just stared blankly ahead as they drove him away. And as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens faded into the distance, one question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Why would a father shoot his son's bride on the happiest day of their lives? The answer, investigators would soon discover, was buried 5 years deep in a sealed court file, a hit-and-run case that was never supposed to see the light of day. And someone had just made sure Franklin Mercer found out about it at the worst possible moment. To understand what happened at St. Maribel's Chapel, you have to go back 3 years. Back to when Courtney Reynolds and Daniel Mercer were just 2 strangers who happened to sit next to each other at a charity fundraiser in downtown Tampa. Courtney was 26 at the time, working as a pediatric nurse at Tampa General Hospital. She had moved to the area from Jacksonville 2 years earlier, looking for a fresh start. Her co-workers described her as warm, compassionate, the kind of person who would stay late to comfort a scared child or bring homemade cookies to the nursing station. Parents requested her specifically. Kids loved her. She had this gift, this ability to make people feel safe. Daniel Mercer was 28, an ambitious real estate investor who had just closed his 3rd commercial property deal in 18 months. He was driven, focused, the kind of man who set goals and crushed them. But despite his success, there was something missing. He worked long hours, spent weekends touring properties, and rarely made time for anything or anyone else. Until he met Courtney. They talked for hours that night at the fundraiser. She told him about her work with kids, the way their resilience inspired her. He told her about his dream of building affordable housing in underserved communities. By the end of the evening, he asked for her number. She hesitated for just a moment, then smiled and said yes. Their first date was at a quiet seafood restaurant overlooking the bay. Daniel was nervous, talking too fast, spilling water on the table. Courtney laughed, told him to relax, and ordered for both of them. By the time dessert arrived, he knew she was different. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Courtney moved into Daniel's condo in Hyde Park. They fell into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the balcony, late-night walks along the riverwalk, Sunday brunches at their favorite cafe. Daniel started leaving work early just to spend more time with her. Courtney introduced him to her small circle of friends, invited him to hospital charity events, made him feel like he was part of something bigger than just deals and contracts. And then, one evening in September 2022, Daniel drove Courtney out to Clearwater Beach at sunset. They walked along the shore, barefoot in the sand, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. He stopped near the water's edge, turned to her, and dropped to one knee. "Courtney Ann Reynolds," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "you walked into my life and changed everything. I don't want to spend another day without you." He pulled out a ring, a simple diamond set in white gold, elegant and understated, just like her. Courtney's hands flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." They kissed as the waves crashed behind them, the sun dipping below the horizon. It was perfect. For the next 8 months, they planned the wedding. Courtney chose St. Maribel's Chapel because it reminded her of a place her grandmother used to take her as a child. Daniel handled the logistics, the catering, the photographer, the guest list. They spent weekends taste-testing cakes, debating floral arrangements, and laughing about how stressed they were getting over napkin colors. But there was one part of the planning that Courtney insisted on handling alone. The guest list on her side. Daniel thought it was odd. She was private about her past, sure, but she'd never been secretive. When he asked why she didn't want him involved, she kissed his cheek and said, "I just want to make sure everyone I invite is someone who really matters. Trust me." He did, and that was his first mistake. Because while Daniel was planning a celebration of love, Courtney was managing something far more dangerous. She was making sure certain people from her past stayed far, far away. Specifically, anyone connected to Jacksonville. Anyone who knew what happened 5 years ago on a quiet residential street. Anyone who knew about the hit and run. She had spent 3 years building a new life, a new identity, a clean slate. She had buried the court records, paid the settlements, changed just enough about herself that no one would connect Courtney Reynolds, the pediatric nurse, to the woman who had destroyed a young man's life. She thought she was safe. She thought the past was dead. But as she would learn on her wedding day, some secrets refused to stay buried. And there was one man who had never stopped looking for the person who ruined his son. Franklin Mercer, Daniel's father. A man Courtney had met only 3 times before the wedding. A man she avoided at family dinners. A man whose cold stare made her stomach twist every time she walked into a room. She told herself it was just nerves, that Franklin was protective of his son, that he'd warm up to her eventually. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, Courtney Reynolds knew the truth. Franklin Mercer didn't trust her. And on June 15th, 2024, he would find out exactly why. Franklin Mercer was not the kind of man who showed emotion easily. At 64 years old, he had lived a life defined by discipline, hard work, and silence. He'd spent 40 years as a contractor, building homes across central Florida with his own 2 hands. He woke up at 5 a.m. every day, drank his coffee black, and didn't waste words on small talk. People who knew him described him as dependable, honest, but distant, cold even. He had raised Daniel alone after his ex-wife left when the boy was barely 2 years old. No child support, no shared custody. just Franklin and his son in a small house in Lakeland, figuring it out day by day. He taught Daniel how to frame a wall, how to change a tire, how to stand up for himself. But he never taught him how to talk about feelings. Franklin didn't believe in that. You worked through your problems, you didn't sit around talking about them. And when Daniel grew up, got his real estate license, and started making more money than Franklin ever had, Franklin was proud. He didn't say it out loud, but he was. Daniel was everything Franklin had worked for. So when Daniel told him he was getting married, Franklin's response was simple. "She good to you?" "She's perfect, Dad." Franklin nodded. "Then I'm happy for you." That was it. No follow-up questions. No request to meet her family. Just a quiet acceptance. But the first time Franklin met Courtney Reynolds, something felt wrong. It was a Sunday dinner at Daniel's condo. Courtney had cooked pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. She set the table, poured wine, smiled warmly as Franklin walked through the door. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Franklin shook her hand. Her grip was firm, but her eyes wouldn't hold his. She looked away after just a second, turning back to the stove. During dinner, she asked him questions. Where he grew up, what kind of work he did, whether he enjoyed retirement. Franklin answered in short sentences. Yes, no, fine. But the entire time, he watched her. The way she laughed a little too loud at Daniel's jokes. The way she kept refilling everyone's glasses, staying busy, never sitting still for long. The way she checked her phone twice during the meal, glancing at the screen quickly before tucking it away. She was nervous. Most people were nervous around Franklin. He knew that. He wasn't exactly warm. But this felt different. This wasn't the nervousness of wanting to impress a future father-in-law. This was the nervousness of someone hiding something. After dinner, Daniel walked Franklin to his truck. "So?" Daniel asked, grinning. "What do you think?" Franklin looked back at the condo. Courtney stood in the window, watching them. "She seems nice," Franklin said. "But?" "No but." Daniel's grin faded slightly. "Dad, come on. I know you. What's wrong?" Franklin opened the truck door, paused. "Just make sure you know her, son. Really know her." Daniel laughed it off. "I do, Dad. I've known her for 3 years. She's the one." Franklin nodded, got in the truck, drove away. But that feeling, that instinct that something wasn't right, it never left. He saw Courtney 2 more times before the wedding. Once at a holiday dinner, once at the engagement party. Both times she avoided him. She'd greet everyone else warmly, hugging Daniel's friends, chatting with his business partners. But when Franklin entered the room, her smile would tighten. She'd find an excuse to step away, refill drinks, check on the food, anything to keep distance between them. And Franklin noticed. He started asking Daniel questions, casual ones. Where did Courtney grow up? What did her family do? Why didn't she talk about Jacksonville much? Daniel didn't have good answers. "She's private about her past, Dad. Her parents passed away when she was young. She doesn't like talking about it." Franklin let it go. But he didn't forget. 3 weeks before the wedding, Franklin did something he'd never done before. He hired a private investigator, not to dig up dirt, not to ruin his son's happiness, but because that feeling in his gut, the one that had kept him alive on construction sites for 40 years, the one that told him when a beam was weak or a foundation was unstable, that feeling was screaming at him. Something about Courtney Reynolds was wrong. The investigator came back with basics, clean credit, nursing license in good standing, No criminal record, but there was a gap. 2 years in Jacksonville with almost no digital footprint, no social media, no lease agreements, nothing. Franklin paid extra, told the investigator to dig deeper, and that's when the investigator hit a wall, a sealed court case. No details, no access, just a case number and a date, March 2019. Franklin pushed harder, called in favors, contacted a lawyer friend, nothing. The file was locked tight, so Franklin let it go, told himself he was being paranoid, that Courtney was just a private person, that Daniel was happy, and that's all that mattered. But on the morning of the wedding, as Franklin buttoned his charcoal suit and stared at himself in the mirror, that feeling came back, stronger than ever. He slipped his handgun into the inside pocket of his jacket. It was a habit. He'd carried it for 15 years, ever since a break-in at his house. He felt safer with it. He told himself it meant nothing, just a precaution. But as he drove to St. Maribel's Chapel, as he sat in the front pew and watched Courtney walk down the aisle in that white lace gown, smiling and calm and perfect, his phone vibrated. One message, unknown number, and everything Franklin thought he knew about his son's bride shattered in an instant. March 23rd, 2019, Jacksonville, Florida. 11:47 p.m. The street was quiet. Riverside Avenue, a residential neighborhood just off the St. Johns River, lined with old oak trees and modest single-family homes. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Most of the houses were dark, their residents already asleep. Marcus Brennan, 23 years old, was walking home from his shift at a downtown restaurant where he worked as a line cook. He didn't own a car, couldn't afford one, so he walked the 2 miles home every night, earbuds in, listening to music, thinking about nothing in particular. He had plans, loose ones, but plans. He wanted to save enough money to go back to school, maybe study culinary arts, open his own place someday. He was good with his hands, creative with flavors. His boss told him he had potential. That night, Marcus crossed Riverside Avenue at the same intersection he always did. No crosswalk, no traffic light, just a quiet street in a quiet neighborhood where cars rarely passed this late. He looked left, looked right, saw nothing, stepped into the street. The car came out of nowhere, headlights off, engine roaring, moving fast, too fast for a residential zone. Marcus had 1 second to react. He turned his head, saw the vehicle barreling toward him, threw his hands up. Impact. The sound was sickening, metal against bone. His body flew 15 feet through the air, landed hard on the asphalt, his head cracking against the curb. The car didn't stop, didn't even slow down. It swerved slightly, tires screeching, and disappeared around the corner, tail lights vanishing into the darkness. Marcus lay in the street, unconscious, blood pooling beneath his head. A neighbor, 68-year-old Dorothy Chen, heard the crash from her living room. She looked out the window, saw the body, and screamed. She called 911, her voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask her to repeat herself 3 times. Paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. Marcus was unresponsive. Severe head trauma, multiple broken bones, internal bleeding. They rushed him to UF Health Jacksonville. He survived, but barely. The doctors told his mother, Sharon Brennan, that Marcus would never be the same. The traumatic brain injury was catastrophic. He'd lost motor function on his left side. His speech was slurred, difficult to understand. His memory fractured. Some days he didn't recognize his own mother. At 23 years old, Marcus Brennan's life was over before it ever really began. Sharon quit her job as a dental hygienist to take care of him full-time. She converted their garage into a bedroom, installed ramps, bought a wheelchair. Every day she fed him, bathed him, helped him with physical therapy exercises that hurt him so badly he'd cry. And every night she cried too. Because the person who did this, the person who destroyed her son's life, was still out there. The police investigation began immediately. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, checked for security cameras. They found one. A grainy doorbell camera 2 houses down captured the moment of impact. The footage was dark, low quality, but it showed the vehicle. A dark sedan, possibly a Honda or Toyota. Florida plates, but the numbers were unreadable. And that was it. No other cameras, no witnesses who saw the driver, no debris left behind except a broken side mirror found 30 feet from the scene. The mirror was sent to the lab for analysis. Detectives traced it to a 2017 Honda Accord, dark blue or black. They ran registrations, found 14,000 vehicles matching that description in the Jacksonville area alone. Dead end. But then, 3 weeks after the crash, they got a break. A man named Trevor Hastings came forward. He told police he'd been walking his dog that night, saw a car speeding through the neighborhood around the same time. He said the driver was a woman, young, white, dark hair, looked panicked. Detectives pressed him for more details. He couldn't give any. It had been dark. He'd only seen her for a second, but it was something. They brought Trevor in for a formal statement. He repeated the story, signed an affidavit, agreed to testify if they found a suspect. 2 days later, Trevor Hastings called the police station. He wanted to retract his statement. He said he'd been mistaken, that he wasn't sure what he saw, that it was too dark, and he didn't want to send an innocent person to jail based on a glimpse. Detectives tried to convince him to reconsider, told him his testimony could be the key to solving the case. Trevor refused, hung up, stopped returning calls, and just like that, the only witness disappeared. The investigation stalled. Weeks turned into months. The case went cold. Sharon Brennan begged detectives to keep looking, to find whoever did this to her son. But without new evidence, there was nothing they could do. Until 6 months later, when Sharon received a phone call from a lawyer she'd never heard of. The lawyer represented the driver. The driver wanted to settle. Sharon was stunned. "Who is it? Who hit my son?" The lawyer wouldn't say. The driver's identity was protected under a sealed agreement. But the offer was significant. $250,000. Enough to cover Marcus's medical bills, his ongoing care, his future. Sharon didn't want money. She wanted justice. She wanted the person who destroyed her son's life to face consequences. But her own lawyer explained the reality. Without a strong case, without a witness, without physical evidence linking a specific person to the crime, a trial was unlikely to succeed. The driver could walk away with nothing. At least with the settlement, Marcus would be cared for. Sharon signed. The case was sealed. The driver's name was redacted from every public record. The police file was locked away. And Courtney Ann Reynolds walked free. She paid the settlement from a trust fund her late grandmother had left her. She moved to Tampa 2 months later, changed her hair, started fresh. Told people she was from Jacksonville, but never talked about it. She became a pediatric nurse. She met Daniel Mercer. She fell in love. She built a new life. And she convinced herself that what happened on Riverside Avenue was an accident, a mistake, something she could bury and forget. But there was one person who never forgot: Franklin Mercer. Because Marcus Brennan wasn't just some random victim in a hit-and-run case. Marcus Brennan was Franklin's son, from his first marriage, a marriage that had ended badly, a son Franklin had barely been a part of, a son he'd failed. And the woman who destroyed Marcus's life was about to marry Franklin's other son. Franklin Mercer had been married once before Daniel was born. Her name was Angela Brennan. They met in 1978 at a community college in Daytona Beach. Franklin was 19, studying construction management. Angela was 18, working toward a teaching degree. They were young, broke, and convinced they could make it work. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. No big wedding, no family drama, just two kids who thought love was enough. It wasn't. Franklin worked brutal hours on construction sites, trying to build a future for them. Angela taught elementary school during the day and waited tables at night to help pay the bills. They barely saw each other. When they did, they fought about money, about exhaustion, about the life they thought they'd have versus the one they were living. Then Angela got pregnant. Marcus was born in January 1980, a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his mother's eyes. For a brief moment, things felt hopeful. Franklin held his son in the hospital and promised himself he'd be a better father than his own had been. He'd provide, he'd protect, he'd be there. But the reality of parenthood hit hard. Marcus cried constantly. Angela was overwhelmed, drowning in postpartum depression she didn't have the words to explain. Franklin worked longer hours to cover the medical bills, the diapers, the formula. He was never home. And when he was home, he didn't know how to help. Angela begged him to talk to her, to be present, to stop running away into his work. Franklin didn't know how. He'd been raised by a man who believed emotions were weakness, so he stayed silent, distant. He thought providing for his family was enough. It wasn't. When Marcus was 2 years old, Angela left. She packed her things, took Marcus, and moved back to Jacksonville to live with her parents. She filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Franklin didn't fight it. He told himself it was for the best, that Marcus would be better off with his mother, that Franklin didn't know how to be the kind of father a kid needed anyway. The divorce was finalized in 1982. Angela got full custody. Franklin was granted visitation rights, 1 weekend a month. He visited twice. The first time, Marcus cried the entire weekend, reaching for his mother, refusing to sleep. Franklin didn't know how to comfort him, didn't know how to connect with a toddler who saw him as a stranger. The second visit was worse. Marcus had a fever. Franklin panicked, called Angela, told her to come get him. She did, and she never asked Franklin to take him again. Franklin told himself it was better this way, that Marcus deserved stability, that a part-time father was worse than no father at all. So he let him go. He sent child support checks every month, never missed a payment, but he stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped trying. A year later, Franklin met Daniel's mother, Rebecca. She was kind, patient, understanding. She knew about Marcus, knew about the guilt Franklin carried, and she didn't push him to talk about it. They got married, had Daniel, built a quiet life together. Rebecca died of cancer when Daniel was 7, and once again, Franklin was alone, raising a son, trying not to repeat the same mistakes. This time, he didn't run. He stayed. He showed up. He built a relationship with Daniel that he'd never had with Marcus. But Marcus was always there. A shadow in the back of Franklin's mind. A son he'd abandoned. a failure he couldn't undo. He thought about reaching out over the years, thought about calling, writing a letter, showing up at Angela's door and apologizing, but he never did. And then, in March 2019, Franklin got a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Sharon Brennan, Angela's mother, Marcus's grandmother. She was crying. "Franklin," she said, her voice breaking. "There's been an accident. Marcus was hit by a car. He's in the hospital. It's bad, really bad." Franklin felt his chest tighten. Is he going to be okay? Sharon's silence told him everything. They don't know. The doctors say he might not wake up. And if he does, he won't be the same. Franklin hung up the phone and stood in his kitchen, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of 23 years of absence crash down on him. He drove to Jacksonville that night, showed up at the hospital, asked to see his son. Angela met him in the hallway. She was older now, tired, her face etched with worry. She looked at Franklin and shook her head. "You don't get to do this," she said quietly. "You don't get to show up now. He's my son. He was your son. You gave up that right a long time ago." Franklin didn't argue. He knew she was right. He left the hospital, drove home, and for the first time in decades, Franklin Mercer cried. But he didn't give up. Over the next few months, he stayed in contact with Sharon, asked about Marcus's condition, sent money to help with medical bills, even though Angela refused to take it. And he started digging. He needed to know who did this, who destroyed his son's life and drove away like Marcus didn't matter. He hired investigators, followed leads, hit dead ends. The case was sealed. The driver's identity was protected. Every door Franklin knocked on was slammed in his face. But Franklin Mercer was nothing if not persistent. For 5 years, he searched. And he never told Daniel. Daniel had no idea he had a half-brother. Franklin had buried that part of his life so deep that it felt like another person's story. But now, sitting in the front pew at St. Maribel's Chapel, staring at the text message on his phone, Franklin realized the truth. The woman his son was about to marry, the woman Daniel loved, was the same woman who had destroyed Marcus's life. And someone had just made sure Franklin knew, right before the vows, right before the kiss, right before it was too late to stop it. Franklin's hands shook as he stared at the police report on his screen. Courtney's name, the sealed case number, the date that matched Marcus's accident. His vision blurred, his pulse pounded in his ears, and as Courtney said, "I do," Franklin Mercer stood up and made a choice that would destroy 3 lives in a single moment. 4:36 p.m., 2 minutes before the shot. Franklin's phone vibrated in his jacket pocket for the 3rd time that afternoon. The first 2 messages had been from Daniel's best man, confirming the reception timeline. Franklin had ignored them. He wasn't interested in speeches or toasts or whatever else was planned for after the ceremony. But this 3rd vibration felt different, longer, persistent. Franklin pulled out his phone, expecting another pointless update. Instead, he saw a message from a number he didn't recognize. No name, no caller ID, just 10 digits and a 904 area code. Jacksonville. The message was simple, just 1 sentence and an attachment. "She's the one who did it. Check the name." Below the text was a screenshot, a scanned document, blurry but readable. Franklin's eyes narrowed. He tapped the image to enlarge it. It was a police report. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, case Order 2019-4 CS7823. Hit and run with serious bodily injury. Riverside Avenue. Franklin's breath caught. He knew that case number. He'd memorized it years ago, stared at it on a printed page in his living room, late at night when he couldn't sleep, tried every legal avenue he could think of to unseal it. But the name of the driver had always been redacted, blacked out, hidden behind a court order he couldn't break. Until now. Because in this screenshot, the redaction was gone, and there, in plain black text, was a name Franklin never expected to see. Driver, Reynolds, Courtney Ann, Dob. 4/12/1995. Franklin's vision tunneled. The sounds of the chapel, the string quartet, the murmuring guests, the reverend's voice faded into static. His hands started to shake. He read the report again and again. Date of incident, March 23rd, 2019. Victim, Brennan, Marcus L. Injuries, traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, permanent disability. Driver fled the scene. Witness statement retracted. Case settled privately. Records sealed by court order. It was all there. Every detail Franklin had spent 5 years trying to uncover. And the driver, the person who had destroyed his son's life, who had left Marcus broken and brain-damaged and dependent on round-the-clock care, was standing 20 feet away in a white lace gown, about to become his daughter-in-law. Franklin looked up. Courtney stood at the altar, holding Daniel's hands, smiling softly as the Reverend spoke. She looked calm, radiant, happy, like she didn't have a care in the world, like she hadn't destroyed a man's life and paid her way out of consequences. Franklin's chest tightened, his jaw clenched, heat flooded his face. He looked back at his phone, read the message again. She's the one who did it. Who sent this? Who had access to sealed court records? Who knew Franklin would be here at this exact moment, watching this woman marry his son? His mind raced through possibilities. A lawyer? A cop? Someone from Marcus's family? But none of it made sense. Sharon Brennan didn't know about Daniel. Angela had no idea. Franklin had another son getting married. The settlement had been finalized years ago. Why would anyone bring this up now? Unless someone wanted Franklin to know. Someone wanted him to see this. Right now. At the wedding. Someone wanted him to react. Franklin's hand moved instinctively to the inside pocket of his jacket. The gun was there. A Glock 19. Loaded. He'd carried it for 15 years. Force of habit. Protection. He told himself to breathe, to think, to process this rationally. But rational thought was slipping away. Because all Franklin could see was Marcus. Marcus at 23, vibrant and full of life, walking home from work with earbuds in. Marcus in a hospital bed, tubes running from his arms, machines beeping, eyes vacant. Marcus in a wheelchair, drooling, struggling to form words, looking at his mother with confusion because he couldn't remember who she was. And the woman who did that to him was about to say vows, about to kiss Franklin's son, about to become part of Franklin's family. The Reverend's voice cut through Franklin's thoughts. Courtney, do you take Daniel to be your lawfully wedded husband? Courtney's voice rang out, clear and steady. I do. Those 2 words hit Franklin like a gunshot. She said them so easily, so confidently, like the past didn't exist, like Marcus didn't exist, like she deserved happiness. Franklin stood. The movement was sudden, automatic, his body acting before his brain could stop it. Heads turned. Guests nearby looked confused. The Reverend paused mid-sentence. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, his face puzzled. Dad? Franklin didn't hear him. His hands slipped into his jacket, fingers wrapped around the grip of the gun. Courtney's eyes met his for the first time all day, and in that split second, Franklin saw it. Recognition, fear, guilt. She knew. She knew exactly who Marcus was. She knew exactly what she'd done, and she'd hidden it from Daniel. From everyone. Franklin pulled the gun from his jacket. Screams erupted instantly. Guests scrambled backward. Chairs toppled. A woman shrieked. Daniel's eyes went wide. "Dad, what are you doing?" Courtney took a step back, her hands rising instinctively. "Franklin, please." But Franklin wasn't listening. All he could see was his son, his first son, the one he'd failed, the one whose life had been stolen by the woman standing in front of him. And before he could think, before he could stop himself, before anyone could reach him, Franklin pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered everything. Courtney's body jerked. Her knees buckled. She reached for Daniel, fingers grasping at air, and then she fell. The white lace gown pulled around her, red spreading fast across the fabric. Daniel dropped to his knees, catching her, screaming her name, and Franklin just stood there, the gun hanging loose in his hand, staring at what he'd done. The phone in his other hand buzzed one more time. A second message from the same unknown number. Franklin looked down at the screen. It read, "Now he knows what you lost." The first scream came from a bridesmaid, a sharp, piercing shriek that cut through the echo of the gunshot and triggered total chaos. Guests exploded into motion. Some ran for the exits, shoving past each other, tripping over chairs, scrambling toward the parking lot. Others dropped to the ground, covering their heads, pulling their children down with them. A man in a grey suit tackled his wife behind a stone planter. A woman in a floral dress crawled under a pew, sobbing uncontrollably. The flower girl, a tiny 5-year-old in a white dress with a basket of petals scattered across the ground, stood frozen in the center aisle, staring at Courtney's body, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her mother rushed forward, scooped her up, and ran. Daniel was on his knees at the altar, holding Courtney in his arms. "Courtney! Courtney!" His voice cracked, raw and desperate. He pressed his hands against the wound just below her ribcage, trying to stop the bleeding, but the blood came fast, too fast. It poured between his fingers, soaking into his white dress shirt, staining his hands red. Courtney's eyes were wide, unfocused, her mouth moving, but no sound coming out. She tried to lift her hand toward Daniel's face, but it fell limply back to her side. "Stay with me," Daniel begged, his voice breaking. "Please, baby, stay with me. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." But he could see it in her eyes, the light fading, the life draining out of her. "Somebody call 911, he screamed. "Please, somebody help." A groomsman already had his phone out, shouting into it. "Yes, there's been a shooting. St. Maribel's Chapel on Gulf Boulevard. A woman's been shot. She's bleeding. God, there's so much blood. Please send someone now." Behind Daniel, Franklin Mercer stood motionless. The gun hung from his right hand, barrel pointing at the ground. Smoke still curled from the muzzle. His face was blank, expressionless, like he was watching the scene from somewhere far away, disconnected from his own body. He didn't try to run, didn't try to hide the weapon. He just stood there, staring at Courtney, at the blood spreading across the white stone floor, at his son sobbing over the woman he'd just killed. Two groomsmen, both former college football players, broad-shouldered and fast, rushed Franklin from the side. The first one hit him low, wrapping his arms around Franklin's waist and driving him to the ground. The second grabbed his wrist, twisting it hard until the gun clattered onto the stone. "Don't move! Don't you dare move!" one of them shouted, pinning Franklin's arms behind his back. Franklin didn't resist, didn't fight, didn't say a word. He lay there, his cheek pressed against the cold stone, breathing slowly, staring at nothing. One of the groomsmen kicked the gun away, sending it skidding across the courtyard. The other kept Franklin pinned, his knee pressing into Franklin's spine. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the groomsman yelled. "What did you do? What did you do?" Franklin's lips moved, a whisper, barely audible. "I just found out." "What?" "I just found out." Louder this time, hollow, distant. "Found out what?" "You just shot your son's bride." Franklin didn't respond. He closed his eyes and stopped talking. In the distance, sirens wailed. The chapel had a direct line to Clearwater Police. Someone inside had hit the panic button the moment the gun appeared. Officers were already en route when the first 911 call came through. They arrived in 4 minutes. 3 patrol cars screeched into the parking lot, lights flashing, doors flying open. Officers ran toward the chapel, hands on their weapons, shouting for people to get back, to stay down, to move away from the scene. A female officer reached the altar first. She saw Daniel covered in blood, saw Courtney motionless in his arms, and immediately radioed for paramedics. "We need EMS now. Gunshot wound to the torso. Female, late 20s. Unresponsive." She knelt beside Daniel. "Sir, I need you to let her go. Let me help her." Daniel shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I can't leave her. I can't." "You're not leaving her. But I need space to work. Please." Another officer gently pulled Daniel back. He fought for a second, then collapsed into the officer's arms, his entire body shaking. The female officer checked Courtney's pulse. Faint, thready, fading. She ripped open a trauma kit, pressed gauze against the wound, applied pressure. Blood soaked through immediately. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, stay with me." Courtney's eyes fluttered. Her lips moved, forming a single word. "Sorry." Then her eyes closed. 30 seconds later, paramedics burst through the chapel entrance, a stretcher between them, a medic bag swinging from one shoulder. They took over immediately. Cut away Courtney's dress, started chest compressions, inserted an IV line, loaded her onto the stretcher. Daniel tried to follow, but an officer held him back. "Sir, you need to stay here. We need a statement." "That's my wife," Daniel shouted. "I'm going with her." "Sir, she's my wife." The officer looked at his partner, then nodded. "Fine. But you ride with us, not in the ambulance. Understood?" Daniel didn't argue. He ran after the stretcher, his blood-soaked hands shaking, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens screamed to life. The vehicle tore out of the parking lot, speeding toward Clearwater Memorial Hospital 2 miles away. Daniel stood in the parking lot, watching it disappear, his chest heaving, his world collapsing. Behind him, officers cuffed Franklin Mercer and lifted him to his feet. He didn't look at Daniel, didn't look at anyone. He just stared straight ahead, silent as they read him his rights and led him toward a patrol car. Daniel turned, saw his father, saw the man who raised him, who taught him how to build things, who told him to work hard and be honest and protect the people he loved. And something inside Daniel broke. "Why?" he screamed. "Why did you do this?" Franklin stopped walking. The officers holding him paused. For the first time since the shooting, Franklin looked at his son. His expression was unreadable. Grief, guilt, anger, all of it tangled together. "She took someone from me," Franklin said quietly. "Someone you never knew about." Daniel's face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Franklin didn't answer. The officers pulled him forward, opened the patrol car door, and pushed him inside. The door slammed shut. And as the car drove away, Daniel stood alone in the parking lot of St. Maribel's Chapel, covered in his wife's blood, with no idea that his father had just killed the woman who destroyed a brother he never knew existed. By 4:55 p.m., St. Maribel's Chapel looked like a war zone. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the courtyard entrance. Shattered glass from overturned champagne flutes crunched under officers' boots. White chairs lay toppled in every direction. Flower petals, meant for celebration, were scattered across blood-stained stone. Detectives arrived 12 minutes after the shooting. Lead Detective Maria Castellanos, a 16-year veteran of the Clearwater Police Department, stepped out of an unmarked sedan and surveyed the scene with sharp, calculating eyes. She'd worked dozens of violent crimes, but a wedding day shooting was a first. Her partner, Detective Kevin Rains, walked beside her, notebook already open. "What do we know?" Castellanos asked the uniformed sergeant managing the scene. The sergeant glanced at his notes. "Victim is Courtney Reynolds, 29, bride. Shooter is Franklin Mercer, 64, father of the groom. Single gunshot to the torso. Victim was transported to Clearwater Memorial in critical condition. Shooters in custody, currently being transported to the station. Weapon recovered at the scene, Glock 19, registered to the suspect." Castellanos nodded. "Witnesses?" 147 guests. Most fled. We've got about 40 still here, giving statements. Chaos doesn't even begin to describe it. Where's the groom? Rode with patrol to the hospital. He's a mess, covered in blood. Kept saying he didn't understand why his father would do this. Castellanos turned to Rains. "Get statements from everyone still here. I want timelines, positions, anything unusual they noticed before the shot. And find out if anyone saw the shooter act strange during the ceremony." Rains nodded and moved toward a cluster of witnesses sitting on a low stone wall, still visibly shaken. Castellanos walked to the altar. The blood pool was massive, dried already in the Florida heat. She crouched down, studying the scene. One shot, close range. The shooter had been standing less than 10 feet away. No struggle, no warning. Just stood up and fired. A crime scene tech approached, holding an evidence bag. Inside was a cell phone. "Detective, we found this in the shooter's jacket pocket. Screen's still unlocked." Castellanos pulled on gloves, took the phone, and looked at the screen. A text message was open. Unknown sender. 904 area code. She read it. "She's the one who did it. Check the name." Below it, a screenshot of a police report. "Hit and run case. Jacksonville. 2019. Driver's name. Courtney Ann Reynolds." Castellanos' jaw tightened. She scrolled down. A second message had come through 2 minutes after the first. "Now he knows what you lost." She stared at the screen, her mind racing. This wasn't random. This wasn't a crime of passion. Someone had sent Franklin Mercer this information. At the wedding, minutes before the vows, someone had orchestrated this. "Bag this," she told the tech, "and get me a warrant for phone records. I want to know who sent these messages and where they sent them from." The tech nodded and took the phone. Castellanos stood, scanning the scene again. Guests were being interviewed in small groups. Some were crying. Some were angry. A few still looked shell-shocked, staring into space. She approached a woman in a lavender dress, one of the bridesmaids, sitting on a bench with her head in her hands. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Castellanos. Can I ask you a few questions?" The woman looked up, mascara streaked down her face. This doesn't make any sense. Franklin barely said 2 words all day. He just sat there, quiet. And then he just stood up and... Did you see him do anything unusual before the shooting? Check his phone? Talk to anyone? The woman shook her head. No, he was just sitting there, staring straight ahead. He looked tense, but I thought he was just, one of those dads who doesn't like weddings. Did you notice any interaction between him and the bride? Courtney? No. Actually, that was weird. She never even looked at him. Not during photos, not when she walked down the aisle. It was like she was avoiding him. Castellanos made a note. Did she seem nervous? Not really. I mean, every bride's nervous. But Courtney seemed, I don't know, calm. Too calm, maybe. Across the courtyard, Detective Rains was interviewing the Reverend, an older man still visibly shaken. He stood up right as she said, "I do," the Reverend said. I thought maybe he was going to object. Some fathers do that. Stand up, make a speech. But then I saw the gun, and I just froze. Did he say anything before he fired? No, nothing. He just pulled it out and shot her. Rains wrote it down. And after? He dropped the gun. Didn't run. Didn't try to shoot anyone else. Just stood there like he was in shock. Another officer approached Castellanos. "Detective, we just got word from the hospital." Castellanos turned. "And? Victim's still in surgery. It's not looking good." Castellanos exhaled slowly. She looked back at the altar, at the blood, at the wedding that had turned into a crime scene. A father shooting his son's bride, a text message revealing a 5-year-old hit and run, a mystery sender who wanted this to happen. This wasn't just a murder. This was revenge, and someone had used Franklin Mercer to carry it out. "Get me everything on Courtney Reynolds," Castellanos told Rains. "I want her background, her history, her sealed court records. Whatever happened in Jacksonville, it's connected to this." Rains nodded. "You think someone set him up?" "I think someone handed him a loaded gun, figuratively and literally, and waited to see what he'd do with it." She looked toward the parking lot, where Franklin had been taken away in cuffs. "And I think Franklin Mercer just became someone's weapon." 5:47 p.m. Clearwater Memorial Hospital. Courtney Reynolds was pronounced dead. She'd been in surgery for 53 minutes. The trauma team had done everything they could, resuscitated her twice on the operating table, repaired the damage to her liver and stomach, transfused 4 units of blood. But the bullet had torn through too many vital structures. The internal bleeding was catastrophic. At 5:47 p.m., her heart stopped for the 3rd time. And this time, it didn't start again. Dr. Patel, the lead surgeon, pulled off his blood-soaked gloves and looked at the clock. He'd been a trauma surgeon for 19 years. He'd saved countless lives. But today wasn't one of those days. He walked out of the operating room and into the waiting area where Daniel sat, still in his blood-stained wedding suit, his hands shaking, his eyes hollow. Daniel stood the moment he saw the doctor's face. He already knew. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Patel said quietly. "We did everything we could." Daniel didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at nothing, as the words sank in. His wife of 8 minutes was dead, shot by his own father, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Daniel's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair behind him, his face in his hands, and for the first time since the shooting, he sobbed. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that echoed through the empty hallway. A hospital chaplain approached, offered words of comfort, but Daniel didn't hear any of it. All he could hear was the gunshot. All he could see was Courtney falling. All he could feel was her blood on his hands. 6 miles away, at the Clearwater Police Department, Franklin Mercer sat in Interrogation Room 3. He'd been processed, fingerprinted, photographed, strip-searched for additional weapons. He was still wearing his charcoal wedding suit, now wrinkled and stained with sweat. His hands were cuffed to a metal ring bolted to the table. He sat with his back straight, his face blank, staring at the two-way mirror on the wall. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't asked for water, hadn't said a word since his arrest. At 6:02 p.m., Detective Castellanos entered the room, followed by Detective Rains. They sat across from Franklin, placing a folder on the table between them. Castellanos studied him for a long moment. Franklin didn't look like a killer. He looked like a tired old man, worn down, hollow. "Mr. Mercer," Castellanos began, her voice calm but firm. "Do you understand why you're here?" Franklin nodded slowly. "I need you to say it out loud for the recording." "Yes," Franklin said quietly. His voice was hoarse. "I shot Courtney Reynolds." "At your son's wedding?" "Yes." "Why?" Franklin's jaw tightened. He looked down at his cuffed hands. "Because she destroyed my other son's life." Castellanos and Rains exchanged a glance. "Your other son?" Rains asked. "Marcus Brennan. He's 28 now. Lives in Jacksonville. He can't walk. Can't talk right. Can't remember most days. Because 5 years ago, Courtney Reynolds hit him with her car and drove away." Castellanos opened the folder, pulled out a printed copy of the police report from Franklin's phone. "This report?" Franklin looked at it, nodded. "That's the one." "How long have you known Courtney was the driver?" "I found out today, at the wedding. Someone sent me that message right before she said her vows." "Someone sent you this information," Castellanos repeated slowly. "And within 2 minutes, you shot her." "I didn't plan it," Franklin said, his voice rising slightly. "I didn't go there to kill her. I didn't even know it was her until I got that text. But you brought a gun to your son's wedding." Franklin's eyes flicked up to meet hers. "I always carry. Have for 15 years. It's a habit." "A habit," Rains said flatly. "You brought a loaded weapon to a wedding, received a text message, and immediately used that weapon to kill someone. That doesn't sound like impulse to me, Mr. Mercer. That sounds like opportunity." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Castellanos leaned forward. "Walk me through it. You're sitting in the front pew. Your son's about to get married. Your phone buzzes. You read the message. What were you thinking?" Franklin was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was thinking about Marcus, about the night I got the call that he'd been hit, about seeing him in the hospital, hooked up to machines, brain damaged beyond repair, about his mother crying because her son would never be the same, about how the driver got away with it, paid some money, and walked free." He looked up at Castellanos, his eyes red-rimmed. "And then I looked at Courtney, standing there in her wedding dress, smiling, about to marry my son, and I couldn't let her get away with it again. So you killed her." "I wanted her to admit it. I wanted Daniel to know what kind of person she was. I wanted—" Franklin's voice cracked. He stopped, took a breath. "I wasn't thinking. I just reacted." "You reacted by shooting an unarmed woman in front of 147 people." Franklin didn't respond. Rains pulled out another document. "Mr. Mercer, you told officers at the scene that you just found out. You've repeated that multiple times. You're claiming you had no idea Courtney was involved in your son's hit and run until today. That's right. But our tech team just pulled your search history. You've been researching Courtney Reynolds for 3 months. You hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. You requested access to sealed court records. You knew something was off about her. Franklin's face tightened. I suspected. I didn't know. You suspected enough to dig into her background. You suspected enough to bring a gun. You suspected enough to be ready. I told you. I always carry— Stop. Castellanos cut him off. You're an intelligent man, Mr. Mercer. You knew carrying a weapon into an emotionally charged situation was dangerous. And when that text message came through, you made a choice. You chose to stand up. You chose to pull that gun. You chose to fire. Franklin stared at her, his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists. Someone sent me that message, he said through gritted teeth. Someone wanted me to know. Someone wanted this to happen. Who? I don't know. You don't know, Rains repeated. An unknown number sends you classified information at the exact moment your son is getting married, and you just happen to have a loaded gun ready to go. You're telling me that's a coincidence? I'm telling you someone manipulated me. Or, Castellanos said evenly, you've been planning this for weeks, and the text message was just your trigger. Franklin shook his head. No, I didn't. I wouldn't. You wouldn't what? Kill the woman who hurt your son. Because you already did. Silence filled the room. Franklin slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. Courtney Reynolds died 20 minutes ago, Castellanos said quietly. So whatever you thought you were doing, confronting her, making her admit what she did, it doesn't matter now. You didn't get justice for Marcus. You destroyed Daniel's life, and you're going to spend the rest of yours in prison. Franklin closed his eyes. A single tear slid down his weathered cheek. I didn't want to kill her, he whispered. I just wanted her to pay. Well, she did, Castellanos said. And so will you. She stood, gathering her folder. Rains followed. As they reached the door, Franklin spoke again. Find out who sent me that message, please. Because whoever it was, they wanted this to happen. They wanted me to pull that trigger. And if you don't find them, Daniel will never know the truth. Castellanos paused at the door, looked back at him. We'll find them, Mr. Mercer. But it won't change what you did. She left the room. The door locked behind her, and Franklin Mercer sat alone in the interrogation room, handcuffed to a table, staring at the wall, knowing his life was over. The next morning, Detective Castellanos sat in her office, 3 cups of coffee deep, staring at a digital forensics report that made no sense. The unknown number that sent Franklin Mercer the text message had been traced. Burner phone. Purchased with cash at a convenience store in Tampa 2 weeks before the wedding. No surveillance footage. The store's cameras had been down for maintenance. The phone was activated the morning of June 15th. It sent 2 messages to Franklin Mercer's phone at 4:36 p.m. and 4:40 p.m., then was powered off and never used again. But here's what made Castellanos' blood run cold. The cell tower data showed the phone was inside St. Maribel's Chapel when the messages were sent. Whoever texted Franklin wasn't watching from a distance. They were at the wedding. Castellanos leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. 147 guests. Any one of them could have sent those messages. But why? What did someone gain from exposing Courtney's past at that exact moment? from turning Franklin into a killer, from destroying 3 lives in a single afternoon. Rains knocked on her door, walked in holding a manila envelope, got the guest list from the wedding planner, also pulled phone records for everyone who RSVP'd. He dropped the envelope on her desk. Castellanos opened it, spread the documents across her desk. Names, addresses, phone numbers. She scanned the list. Daniel's side, Courtney's side, family, friends, co-workers. Anyone stand out? She asked. Not yet. Most of them are exactly who you'd expect. Daniel's business partners, Courtney's nursing colleagues, a few distant relatives. Castellanos frowned. What about people connected to Marcus Brennan? His mother, his grandmother. Angela Brennan, Marcus's mother, wasn't on the guest list. Neither was Sharon Brennan, the grandmother. We reached out to them yesterday. Angela didn't even know Daniel existed. Franklin never told her he had another son. So she couldn't have sent the message. Right. And even if she somehow found out about the wedding, why would she want Franklin to kill Courtney? The settlement was finalized years ago. Angela moved on. Marcus is in a care facility. She's not looking for revenge. Castellanos tapped her pen against the desk. Then who benefits from this? Rains shrugged. Maybe nobody. Maybe it's just someone who knew the truth and wanted it exposed. At a wedding? In the most destructive way possible? Castellanos shook her head. No. This was deliberate, personal. Someone wanted chaos. She turned back to the guest list, scanning names more carefully this time. Then she saw it. A name that didn't quite fit. She grabbed her laptop, pulled up the sealed court records from the Jacksonville hit-and-run case. The file had been unsealed by court order overnight as part of the murder investigation. She scrolled through witness statements, police notes, settlement agreements, and there it was. Trevor Hastings, the witness who recanted his statement 6 weeks after the crash. Castellanos' eyes narrowed. She cross-referenced the name with the wedding guest list. No match. But then she noticed something else. One of the groomsmen, a man named Kyle Hastings, shared the same last name. She opened a new tab, ran a background check. Kyle Hastings, 31 years old, college friend of Daniel's, worked in finance, clean record. Father, Trevor Hastings. Castellanos felt her pulse quicken. Trevor Hastings, the witness who saw the driver and then mysteriously changed his story, was the father of one of Daniel's groomsmen, and Kyle Hastings had been standing 15 feet from Franklin when the shooting happened. She grabbed her phone, dialed Rains. I need you to pull everything on Kyle Hastings, phone records, social media, financial records, and find out if he knew about his father's connection to the hit-and-run case. You think he's the one who sent the messages? I think it's too big a coincidence to ignore. 3 weeks before the wedding, May 24th, 2024, Jacksonville District Attorney's Office, Assistant District Attorney Lauren Pierce was reviewing case files when an unusual request landed on her desk. A formal petition to unseal a 2019 hit-and-run case. Case 2019-04-78023. The petitioner's name, Daniel James Mercer. Lauren frowned. She remembered this case vaguely. High-profile settlement, driver's identity sealed by court order. The victim's family had agreed to the terms. Why would someone want it reopened now? She pulled up the details. The victim was Marcus Brennan, now 28, living in a long-term care facility. Permanent brain damage. The driver had paid $250,000 in a sealed settlement. The petition claimed new evidence had emerged, suggesting the settlement was obtained through witness intimidation and evidence tampering. It requested the driver's identity be unsealed and the case be reviewed for potential criminal prosecution. Lauren checked the signature on the petition. Daniel James Mercer, Tampa address, notarized signature. Everything looked legitimate. She processed the request, sent a notice to the sealed parties, including the driver, whose identity even Lauren couldn't access without a judge's approval, and scheduled a hearing for July 2nd. Standard procedure. But 2 weeks later, on June 8th, she received a frantic phone call. "This is Daniel Mercer. I just received a notice about a court petition I never filed." Lauren pulled up the case file. "Mr. Mercer, according to our records, you submitted a formal request to unseal case for answer 2019-04-7823 on May 24th. I didn't submit anything. I don't even know what case you're talking about." Lauren's stomach dropped. "Sir, the petition has your name, your address, and a notarized signature. Then someone forged it, because I never filed any petition. I don't know anything about a hit-and-run case. I don't know anyone named Marcus Brennan." Lauren went silent. She stared at the document on her screen. If the petition was forged, that meant someone had used Daniel's identity to reopen a sealed criminal case. Someone who wanted Courtney Reynolds to know her past was being exposed. Someone who wanted to create pressure, fear, panic. "Mr. Mercer," Lauren said slowly, "are you currently engaged or planning to get married?" "Yes, in a week. Why?" "And does your fiancé have any connection to Jacksonville?" "She lived there a few years ago. Why are you asking me this?" Lauren hesitated. Legally, she couldn't disclose the driver's name. It was still sealed. But if this petition was forged, if someone was manipulating the system to target Courtney Reynolds. "Mr. Mercer, I think you need to have a very serious conversation with your fiancée about her time in Jacksonville, specifically March 2019. What happened in March 2019? I can't tell you that, but if she knows, she'll tell you. And if she doesn't tell you, that's your answer." The line went quiet. Then Daniel said, "I'll talk to her," but he never did. Back in the present, Detective Castellanos sat across from Lauren Pierce in a conference room at the district attorney's office. Lauren slid a copy of the forged petition across the table. "Daniel Mercer called me 2 weeks before his wedding. He said he never filed this. I advised him to talk to his fiancée. Based on what happened at that wedding, I'm guessing he didn't." Castellanos studied the signature. It looked convincing, professional. Someone had put real effort into this forgery. "Who had access to this petition after it was filed?" she asked. "It's public record once it's filed. Anyone could pull it. But the notice of unsealing, that only went to the parties involved, the victim's family and the sealed driver. Courtney Reynolds. Yes, she would have received a certified letter on May 28th, informing her that her identity was being challenged and that a hearing was scheduled for July 2nd. Castellanos leaned back. So Courtney knew. She knew someone was trying to expose her, and she thought it was Daniel. That would explain why she seemed nervous at the wedding, Rains added. She thought her fiancé had discovered the truth and was planning to confront her. "But it wasn't Daniel," Castellanos said. "Someone used his name. Someone who wanted Courtney to think Daniel had turned against her." Lauren nodded. "Which means whoever did this wasn't just exposing Courtney. They were destroying her relationship with Daniel at the same time." Castellanos stood, began pacing. "So the timeline is, someone forges a petition using Daniel's name. Courtney gets the notice. She panics, but doesn't tell Daniel because she thinks he already knows. She walks down the aisle thinking her secret is about to come out. Then, minutes before she says, "I do," Franklin gets a text message with the proof, and he kills her. "Someone orchestrated all of it," Rains said quietly. "But who?" Lauren asked. "Who benefits from destroying both Courtney and Daniel?" Castellanos pulled out her phone, scrolled to the photo of Kyle Hastings from the wedding. "I think I know," she said. She pulled up Kyle Hastings' phone records from the past 6 months. And there it was. On May 22nd, 2 days before the forged petition was filed, Kyle Hastings made a call to a notary public in Tampa, the same notary whose stamp appeared on the petition. On June 13th, 2 days before the wedding, Kyle purchased a prepaid phone from a convenience store in Tampa. Cash transaction, same store where the burner phone was bought. And on June 15th at 4:34 p.m., Kyle's personal phone pinged off a cell tower at St. Maribel's Chapel. 2 minutes later, the burner phone sent the first message to Franklin. Castellanos looked at Rains. "Get a warrant. I want Kyle Hastings in custody within the hour." But when officers arrived at Kyle's apartment in Tampa, he was gone. The apartment was empty, cleared out. No furniture, no personal belongings, just a single piece of paper taped to the refrigerator, a printed photo. It showed a young man in a hospital bed, eyes vacant, tubes running from his arms. On the back, written in black marker, "For Marcus, justice delayed is justice denied." Kyle Hastings had vanished, and with him the answers to why he had turned a wedding into a massacre. 2 months later, August 2024. Daniel Mercer sat alone in the living room of his Tampa condo, staring at a wedding photo that never should have been taken. It was from the rehearsal dinner. Him and Courtney, laughing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They looked happy, in love, like people who had a future. That photo was taken 24 hours before his father shot her dead. Daniel hadn't been back to work, hadn't answered calls from friends, hadn't left the condo except to meet with detectives and lawyers. His father was in Pinellas County Jail, awaiting trial for second-degree murder. Franklin's attorney was building a defense around diminished capacity, arguing that the sudden emotional shock of discovering Courtney's secret had impaired his judgment. Daniel didn't care about the defense. He didn't care about the trial. All he cared about was the truth. And the truth was a mess. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew, had destroyed a man's life and hidden it from him for 3 years. The father he respected, the man who taught him integrity, had become a murderer in a single moment of rage. And the brother he never knew existed, Marcus Brennan, was the reason everything had fallen apart. Detective Castellanos had told him everything. Marcus was Franklin's son from his first marriage. Franklin had abandoned him as a child, never visited, never called, just sent child support checks and pretended he didn't exist, until Courtney Reynolds hit him with her car and left him brain damaged. Then, suddenly, Franklin cared. Daniel didn't know how to process that, didn't know whether to hate his father for what he did or pity him for what he lost. He'd visited Marcus once, drove to Jacksonville, walked into the care facility, sat beside a man he shared DNA with, but had never met. Marcus didn't recognize him, didn't speak, just stared out the window, drool running down his chin, a nurse wiping his face every few minutes. Daniel had stayed for 10 minutes, then left. He never went back. At the Clearwater Police Department, Detective Castellanos sat in her office, reviewing the case file for the 100th time. Kyle Hastings was still missing. They'd issued a warrant, checked his financials, monitored his family. Nothing. He'd vanished completely. And without him, the biggest question remained unanswered. Why? Why had Kyle Hastings orchestrated this entire nightmare? Castellanos had theories. Maybe he blamed Courtney for what happened to Marcus. Maybe he blamed Franklin for abandoning his son. Maybe he wanted both of them to suffer. But none of it explained the precision, the planning, the cruelty. Kyle had forged legal documents, bought burner phones, timed his messages perfectly. He'd turned a wedding into a crime scene and then disappeared without a trace. It was personal. But how? Rains walked into her office, holding a folder. Just got Kyle Hastings' sealed juvenile records. Took 2 months and a court order, but we finally got them. He dropped the folder on her desk. Castellanos opened it, scanned the first page. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. Rains leaned over her shoulder. What? Kyle Hastings was adopted at age 6. His birth name was Kyle Brennan. Rains froze. Brennan, as in Marcus Brennan's younger brother. The room went silent. Castellanos flipped through the file. Kyle had been placed in foster care after his mother, Angela Brennan, struggled to care for both him and Marcus. She'd kept Marcus, given up Kyle. Trevor Hastings, the witness who recanted his statement, had adopted Kyle when he was 8. Kyle grew up knowing he had a brother who was abandoned by their father, a brother who was destroyed by a hit-and-run driver. And when that driver married Franklin's other son, the son Franklin actually raised, Kyle saw his chance, not just for revenge, for justice. He didn't just want Courtney dead, Castellanos said quietly. He wanted Franklin to kill her. He wanted Daniel to lose everything. He wanted them all to suffer the way Marcus suffered. Rains exhaled slowly. So, he set the whole thing up, used Daniel's name to reopen the case, sent Franklin the evidence, made sure it happened at the wedding, maximum damage, and then disappeared. Castellanos closed the file, leaned back in her chair. We're never going to find him, are we? Rains shook his head. He planned this for years. He's not coming back. 3 weeks later, Franklin Mercer's trial began. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The gun, the witnesses, the confession. Franklin's defense argued emotional disturbance, temporary insanity, manipulation by an unknown third party. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty, second-degree murder, sentenced to 25 years to life. Daniel sat in the courtroom as the verdict was read. He didn't react, didn't cry, just stood up and walked out. Outside the courthouse, a reporter shoved a microphone in his face. Mr. Mercer, do you forgive your father? Daniel stopped, looked at the camera. My father killed the woman I loved because of a secret she kept from both of us. Someone else set the whole thing in motion, and we'll probably never know why. So no, I don't forgive him. I don't forgive her. And I don't forgive whoever did this. He walked away. Present day, December 2024. The case remains open. Kyle Hastings is still missing. A federal warrant has been issued. His face is on the FBI's most wanted list, but no arrests have been made. Marcus Brennan still lives in a Jacksonville care facility, unaware that his younger brother destroyed 3 lives in his name. Franklin Mercer sits in a cell knowing he pulled the trigger, but wondering every day if he ever really had a choice. And Daniel Mercer lives alone in Tampa, surrounded by the wreckage of a wedding day that was supposed to be the beginning of forever. The lesson: secrets don't just hurt the people who keep them. They destroy everyone they touch. Courtney Reynolds thought she could bury the past. Franklin Mercer thought he could undo his failures. Kyle Hastings thought he could deliver justice. And all three of them learned the same truth. Some wounds never heal. Some debts can never be paid. And revenge, no matter how justified it feels, only creates more victims. This is the story of a wedding day massacre, a hit-and-run cover-up, and a mystery that may never be solved. Because in the end, the person who caused the most damage wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. It was the one who made sure the trigger would be pulled. And he's still out there,